Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Sachin Karnik here. Today is the 14th of May, 2025. We are on part number 19 of the Foundations of Angel Wing Technical Workshop Series. We are going to continue from last time. Before we do so, I just want to very quickly have a small reminder for everyone that these workshops are about the Foundations of Angel Wing workshop. The Foundations of Angel Wing technical book. And it is based on that we are actually doing these presentations on a bi-monthly basis, or sometimes 3 times a month. And it is a continuing series. So it is recommended to listen to this from the beginning, but if not, it's perfectly all right. You can listen to it from any point that you would like. Okay, so with that, we're continuing here further with regards to the I and the me that various theorists have talked about. So based on some of the writings in, let's see, where was this from? This paragraph actually that you see on the screen here. It's a very technical paragraph with regards to the realm of self-psychology and the different academicians, how they have looked at this. So we've broken this down further into this discussion regarding the I and the me, right? So the I seeks authentic self-expression based on intrinsic desires and personal passions. So it should be clear about these 5 sentences that you see on the screen here. When researchers have conceptualized the I, some of them have conceptualized it where the I is that dimension of who we are that is seeking authentic self-expression. We have a need to express ourselves. We have a need to be connected to others. We cannot express ourselves in isolation. Even someone writes a book, or even right now, Sachin here, I'm talking to all of you. This is a form of expression, and that's a need. Self-expression itself is a need. And the more we recognize that, the better off we would be in terms of the ability to detect intrinsic desires, right? So the I, in quotations, seeks authentic self-expression, genuine self-expression based on intrinsic desires. This goes back to the TEMDE, the desire aspect of who we are, that force within. Intrinsic desires are those that are coming from inside, that are motivating us naturally. Personal passions. Right? So the I is in that domain. Now the me reflects socially constructed roles and external expectations from the society. As soon as a child is born, the socially constructed roles are imprinted on that child right from childhood, and then it continues to develop and grow and grow and grow. And external expectations are always there in family life, in occupational life, in friendship life, in connection with just in life with the world in general. There are always external expectations. We cannot live that without that, really, because those external expectations are somebody else's expectations for their benefit or their growth or for the overall growth of the society. So there's 2 points here, that the me technically refers to socially constructed roles, the role that we adopt, right? So we adopt different roles. The roles are adopted by us. Is that really who we are? That's a bigger question about the self. Okay, so there's socially constructed roles, and then there are also external expectations from the society. Right? So I think that's fairly easy to understand. Now, conflict arises when these 2 sources of motivation diverge or they clash. There are 2 sources of motivation. The intrinsic source for career, for family, for marriage, for whatever. The list is endless. And then there are these externally placed expectations. There's a conflict between the 2, usually. Conflict arises when the 2 sources of motivation, they diverge or they clash. So they don't combine together in the right way. They don't combine together, or they don't hang together. They don't complement each other, or they need to complement each other. But when they don't complement each other, they will either diverge. So one will go in one direction at one point, another direction another time, and it causes a lot of conflict internally. Essentially, it is energy fragmentation inside, because it's conflicted nature inside. Right? So conflict arises when these two sources of motivation diverge or clash. The I and the me are sources of motivation. The intrinsic desire is the motivation that is part of the I. That who am I? I want, this is psychological. This is the realm of psychology here. We're not using the word I in the spiritual sense or in the Vedanta sense or something like that. We're not using it that way. This is based in the realm of the research done in psychology, neurology, etc. The different theoreticians have discussed this way. Right? Now, this conflict, it creates something called cognitive dissonance. And Leon Festinger is the researcher who coined that term in 1957. And this is a very famous term in psychology. It's probably in any psychology book. And this is a serious problem in humanity. It's the inner psychological discomfort that is experienced due to the conflict that arises from these two sources of motivation. Right? So, this dissonance rather than resonance, we've talked about this all the time, right? The thoughts, emotions, memory, desire, energy. This actually has all the theories and everything inside there. So this dissonance is a disconnection between these five, among these five. And better word is dissonance, cognitive dissonance, emotional dissonance. The resonant rather than resonance. They don't resonate with each other. They are dissociating with each other. They are dissonant. They are split apart. They diverge. They clash. And again, since today's workshop is on the technical aspects, we know that there are quite a few number of theories in psychology that try to explain motivation as a construct, dissonance as a construct, because these are all constructs. The theoreticians and researchers have come up with to try to determine, is there actually phenomena out there somewhere in reality or within us in reality that actually exists, and that we're giving it a name, we're giving it an idea like motivation or expectation or dissonance. These are all constructs only. But they're constructs because they are hopefully referring to reality. They are pointers to the reality. They are embedding the reality. And the constructs are all constructed by researchers. Our very first 3 or 4 recordings were on this point. Constructs are constructed. Like Leon Festinger constructed this idea called cognitive dissonance because he feels that there is something like that, and that he operationalized it, and many other people have tried to research on that to try to validate the construct. And it's called construct validity in research, in social science research. So is there really such a thing as cognitive dissonance? I would say yes. I think there's quite a bit of validation of that construct since 1957. Absolutely. It's there, it's real, but it's very subtle. In Vedanta, we would call that, the subtle body getting entangled within itself. Right? So there's a very simple example at the very bottom there. A person torn between becoming a musician, that's the I, versus the expectations from society, family. You should be a lawyer. That's the me. Right? The me is that sense that this is not what I want to be, but this is me, me, and then mine. Mine is the possession, right? So that sense of what I ought to be from others, what they are telling me to be, is clashing with my natural intrinsic tendency. natural intrinsic drive and desire across domains of life. Right? Hopefully this is clear. And this is called motivational tension. Technically, it is called motivational tension. Now, to go further in this, let's open this up a little bit further. The I reflects intrinsic motivation and authentic self-expression. If we can be aware of these two, we have gone very far in life. Where is my intrinsic motivation across areas of my life? I have to ask myself this question, right? But in terms of research and theory and all that, to try to unravel, to grasp intrinsic motivation from a research point of view, we would need to do quite a bit of testing, a lot of different scales, and there's a whole methodology to try to discover if that construct exists, what is meant by intrinsic motivation, how is it operationalized, and then from that we could have studies, and there are quite a few of them that talk about where does it come from, what kind of domain does this motivation have, what is its expression in life. I mean, you could get multiple PhDs literally on these two words, in intrinsic motivation. You could get that in neurology and in psychology and neuroscience and behavioral neuroscience and in psychotherapy and so many areas. You could just study that further. It's possible, and so that's why these ideas from a theoretical or research point of view are phenomenally profound to try to unravel their truth. To determine the truth. So I'm going to try to kind of pull this together a bit here, that to try to even define the I, one would need to first really break down what is meant by intrinsic versus extrinsic. How is that defined? Who defines that? What is that domain of the intrinsic versus domain of the extrinsic? So technically, that domain of the intrinsic can be discovered subjectively, and it can also be discovered objectively. All right? So when qualitative research is done with a client or with a participant to discover intrinsic motivations, all kinds of structured questionnaires are placed to try to unravel as many dimensions as possible of motivation. And in doing so, the data that is collected would then further guide the researcher in terms of discovering what is this intrinsic motivation, to get a better handle on it objectively. Just like a scientist, hard scientist who tries to understand how a plant works, plant physiology or animal physiology, human physiology, by observation, by the scientific method, by experimentation. The same approach is used in the soft sciences, but there's more qualitative research done also, because a lot of it is soft science. Right, so that's how this is unraveled. So, and then the other dimension of this I is self-expression, authentic self-expression. What is that? Again, you got to break it up, right? What is authenticity? That's a construct. What is it? How is it operationalized? Operationalization means how do we try to discover its existence, the methodology, the means through which this construct is discovered in reality. That is called operationalization. So authentic self-expression means this, so the expression of oneself psychologically that is coming from intrinsic drives. Is it authentic? Right? So creativity springs from this. Personal aspirations can spring from this. Passion-driven goals also open up. Right? So there's quite a bit beautiful stuff that can happen from intrinsic motivation. Acts from the I are aligned with inner purpose and autonomy. See, so someone who says that I love the work that I'm doing for my company or for my business or for my for my study or whatever it is? Is it coming from an inner purpose, from autonomy? Many people don't feel that autonomy. They feel stuck in old jobs. We talked about that yesterday in the PTP program, right? So this may be there, but it's not that easy because the external demands are so many that this intrinsic natural motivation may be diverted. But people who have reached greatness in life, they have done so because of this intrinsic motivation. They're in tune with the authentic self-expression. So intrinsic motivation is often linked to higher satisfaction and flow. Right? So that's easy to understand, that our satisfaction in life will be so much better, so much greater, so much higher once we are in alignment with that intrinsic motivation. So the I seeks meaning more than material rewards or approval. The I seeks meaning because the purpose, the meaning of my life, my life has to have meaning. Well, a day at a time goes by. If it goes by with a great deal of meaning and significance, then there is intrinsic reward rather than just a material reward or approval. It's intrinsic rather than extrinsic. Now, the me is this other dimension, right? So it refers to socially constructed identity shaped by external factors. There are so many external factors. Family, expectations from family. Of course there are. We're brought up in a family. There's all kinds of expectations. The child's mind, brain is built on these expectations. From culture, from the overall immediate culture, the bigger culture, peer groups, society in general. There's expectations coming from everywhere. As soon as a child goes to school, there's expectations for behavior, for academic performance, for this, for that. That's the way it goes. And if you didn't have any expectations, how does a person even fit into society or even grow in society? Maybe the external motivation or this me here, the extrinsic force is necessary for the development of the internal motivation. How can intrinsic motivation develop without any conditioning, without family, culture, teaching, without learning, without education? How can that be? So to even discover intrinsic motivation, one needs to be in the human culture, human society, where there are expectations. But of course, you could debate about the quality of those expectations. Right? No doubt. Okay, then we get into roles. We play different roles at different times. Roles as a student, as a parent, as a professional, they all stem from this me. The I versus the me. The me ensures social belonging, but may suppress individuality. And we find that, we really want both to really harmoniously hang together. All right, let's go further in this. So conflicts, of course, are a problem. Because the conflicts between the I and the me, the external and the internal, because there's the wanting of two different things. The wanting is, pressures coming from outside versus what I naturally feel like doing, naturally would like to have in my life. Why do people buy lotteries all the time? Why is that? Because they don't want this external force. They don't want anybody telling them what to do, and they don't want to be limited by finances. That you have to work 40 hours a week somewhere just to make a living, be out of that dependency. That's why people buy lottery tickets. That's one of the reasons why, at least. Right? So there's a drive to be free. Because people don't want somebody else telling them what to do. Nobody really wants a boss. And people don't want to be in conflict with those who are working underneath them. You see, so we want frictionless life. But the hierarchical nature of life is that there are always extrinsic factors for most people, if not nearly all people. So this is where societal norms, they can conflict significantly with personal ethics and desires. If personal ethics are developed, again, that's a whole question. How are they developed and all that? That's another whole area. So internalized expectations can create guilt or obligation. It can happen right in family. You got to take care of your parents, take care of in-laws and all that kind of stuff. out of obligation. You don't want to do it, but you say, I have to do it. I've met many people like that. They don't like the mother-in-law or the father-in-law or some other relative that they have to deal with because they're in a marriage with their significant other. And there's expectations that are coming from all sides, and it creates a lot of agitation, sometimes anger, sometimes negativity, sometimes a lot of conflict. So this can lead to ambivalence and stress. These are some of the problems that happen in this. Right? So indecision can happen, anxiety can happen. So this is called motivational conflict. That's the big idea today. What is motivational conflict? We have motivation, but it's conflicted. And that creates anxiety, indecision, confusion. Suppressing one's natural drives, natural tendencies can lead to resentment and loss of self. That happens too quite often. That happens because you're not able to do what's really in your nature to do. And over-identifying with the me, with the external, may result in inauthentic living. And be careful about this word me. This is being used in a very specific research-oriented way. It's being used in terms of that this is, it's like a person who goes as a lawyer in a courtroom. That's the me is active there. But the person may not want to be a lawyer in a courtroom, may want to be a painter. The I is active there, right? So it's the same individual, but now you got the me versus the I because of the different activity. So the persistent tension within, internally, can lead to chronic dissatisfaction. You see, and that's where the trouble begins. Now, again, from a research point of view, what is satisfaction? What is dissatisfaction? The chronicity? Again, these are all areas of research. Theoreticians have talked about this. Satisfaction scales are there, and all kinds of methodology is there. But now we just want to conceptually understand that motivational conflict creates persistent tension. And that leads to dissatisfaction in life, which then just makes life very dull, very unhappy. It creates conflicts with others. It creates overeating, overindulgence, anxiety, depression, stressful reactions. It does all of those kinds of things. Right? So chronic dissatisfaction is harmful to the function of the mind, to the body. And that's why we have the PTP program on Tuesday evenings. Right? So you can see here the link between persistent tension, chronic dissatisfaction, anxiety, indecision, confusion, over-identification with the me, all that kind of stuff. All of it. When you combine it all together, what do we find? Is an unhappy life. And there's a lot of conflict inside. This conflict impairs self-trust. And our decision-making capacity is impacted. Our decision-making capacity, we have that. But the conflict drains energy and it just throws this capacity off. Our decisions are not the right ones then. You see. So there's a bunch of models here, psychological models that explain this concept. Self-determination theory, then cognitive dissonance theory, role theory, humanistic psychology, psychoanalytic theory. And there's 5 major theories that explore what we've been talking about so far today. Right, so the self-determination theory we've been talking about that last several times. This has to do with this intrinsic versus extrinsic drives. The cognitive dissonance is about the mental discomfort and contradiction inside. Role theory studies social roles and internalization. Where do social roles come from? So that's a whole theoretical base and research base in psychology, sociology, social psychology, etc. in role theory. That's a huge area. Humanistic psychology emphasizes self-actualization versus conformity. Carl Rogers and others. There's a bunch of humanist psychologists who are talking about this intrinsic drive, intrinsic development, self-actualization. Maslow talked about that. Right? These humanistic psychologists are talking about paying attention to where is your actual drive and passion to reach the highest states of life, making life as fantastic as you can possibly make it. We can call that self-actualization. In Angel Wing, we call that self-mastery. Right? And this is versus conformity. Now, that doesn't mean, my commentary on that is, it doesn't mean that conformity is out the window completely. That's not the case. Conformity is necessary to some extent. But one cannot just conform just to anything and everything. One has to realize, as one is a teenager and grows up beyond that, what do I need to conform to? Can I go resonate with? I don't like this word conformity. I like the word resonance. To resonate. People say, oh, you're being pressured by a peer group. Are we resonating with them? If there's good quality resonance, no problem. But just being in a state of conformity, sometimes there's a need for that. A lot of people have that need just to be part of a group, to conform to a group, because they cannot handle their independence. They don't know their independence. And self-actualization, or this realization of this, this intrinsic state of happiness, that has to do with independence. It's not about conformity, but it's also not about conflict. People sometimes say, well, if I don't conform, then there'll be conflict. No, I would disagree with that. It doesn't have to be that way. It might be, usually. You can have lack of conformity without conflict. It's possible. You can have certain degree of resonance and interaction, put a boundary around it, and move towards your own self-luminous excellence, self-luminous development, higher development. Why not? Because if we are always just conforming to what others are telling us to do, we'll never find ourselves. We'll never even be true to ourselves. And those who are saying that they're true to themselves and ignoring what the society is saying, family and others, could just wind up in a very egotistical self. You can call that intrinsic motivation, but it's not really very good quality motivation. It's just strengthening the individualized ego, the me, and then that will eventually just cause a lot of conflict. So conflict is the barometer of this imbalance between these two. These are big ideas. I'm trying to put it in straightforward language within a half an hour period of time. And this is, now psychoanalytic theories, there are so many of them, but they all hinge on this internal ego conflict and defense mechanisms. And sometime we'll talk about that. I have given, long workshops on defense mechanisms in the past, 3-day workshops and all that kind of stuff, years back. Right? It's a fascinating subject in psychology. There's maladaptive mechanisms, and there's about 5 or 6 that are major adaptive defense mechanisms. Now, what they exactly are, I'm not going to go into that right now. We would need, many hours to unravel that. But at some point, maybe we can do some special workshop on that in a retreat or something like that. So psychoanalytic theory, it explores internal ego, because the ego is always involved in all of these factors. Okay, just a couple more points here. So navigating the me split. How do we navigate it? 5 points. Awareness is the first step in resolving motivational tension. Just awareness, like what's happening in me. Just to promote this awareness. That's what we're doing in Angel Wing. Right? And all of humanity needs to have this awareness. Then we will stop hurting each other, probably, hopefully. So awareness is the first step in resolving motivational tension. Yeah, we don't want that motivational tension. We want motivational growth. We want motivational, what's the word I'm looking for? It's motivation that is naturally developing and growing without tension, without any resistance inside. There's probably a good word that explains that. I'm just not coming to my mind right now. But that kind of a very beautiful flow. Might even say flow state, maybe. Yeah, you can say that. So naming internal conflicts helps reduce unconscious control. Helps reduce their unconscious control. The conflicts live inside of us. And they are draining energy. They're wasting time. They're creating a lot of trouble. So we need to name them, be aware of them, name them, reflect on the long-term consequences, and get out of that space. Reflect on the long-term consequences. Reflecting on it aids choice clarity. There's 2 technical words there. Choice clarity. my choices are coming from a space of clarity. And that space of clarity is opening due to the choices I'm making. That's what that means. Right? How beautiful that is. Choice clarity. Clear, crystal clear, so the confusion disappears. So balancing the I and the me supports personal integration. So it's balancing both. The inner integration becomes solid. And intentional living involves making informed trade-offs. So an hour at a time, a day at a time. This is intentional living. We've been talking about that for the last year, maybe more than that. Live intentionally. What is my intention? And if I live in that way, I'm going to make my life better. My life experience is going to be better. Because the conflict inside is going to dissipate. So intentional living involves making informed trade-offs. That's what I was saying. Where's the boundaries with the external expectations? Where's my own intrinsic drive? How far do I go with it? It's making trade-offs. And that's called intentional living. All right, it is 7:32, so I'm going to stop here. That's good enough for now. There's a lot of ideas here. And I'm going to open it up for discussion, dialogue. Don't want to cover too much material all at one time. It's not about the quantity of material. It's the quality of understanding it, realizing what it is. I mean, I'm still trying to put this in a very straightforward manner. The actual technical lingo is very, very profound. And I've taken that same language and I've broken it down into more understandable language, right? So that's what it is here. So I'll stop this recording here and we'll open it up for question.